force and destruction unleashed on the Cambodians, along with the fact that the secret operation was conducted on a conspirators were largely executed. The rest of you are under arrest. I thought this was interesting listening to this, so I'm just going to play it while I'm running some EMNC through my camera here. But as you listen to this, keep in mind that everything they're talking about in this video, they claim happened at one time and then stopped happening. And it's opposite of that. All these things have happened, even in a more drastic way than they're about to describe. And they've gotten worse since then for more of the population. So like when they mention a gay bomb that they're going to talk about in a minute. And everything they talk about in here is way worse today. So they tried the gay bomb, they claimed in a couple countries, and they got caught and all this shit. They're full of shit. They did the gay bomb right here in the United States and other places, Canada, United States, and so there's it's not a conspiracy or a conspiracy theory or a conspiracy. It's just fact. We all know about it. To act like it's a conspiracy is a conspiracy because we're told about it. As it's happening, we're all told, hey, we're going to pump the cows full of estrogen and steroids and whatever we want for other heavy metals, minerals, and chemicals, and you're all going to drink the milk, right? So it's like drinking the Kool-Aid, the sugar, all the other shit. Then I'm about to get into another series that I'm working on. But it's all even worse than what these guys are about to describe. The film Valkyrie brought a renewed interest to the complicated story of the failed plot. Number 19. The U.S. Air Force was developing a gay bomb. How do you slow down an impending army? Instead of dropping lethal explosives, the U.S. military once considered an unexpected alternative. Researchers considered the possibility of dropping a non-lethal bomb full of pheromone mixture on troops. Although this idea they considered it. They did it on the entire country. Soldiers would be too distracted by each other to keep fighting.
That you will not only be disinclined to fight, but you will be compelled to be having sex with the people around you.
It's especially clear that authorities were really reaching with this particular idea.
Do they really think that, like, they're faced with, like, guns and, like, being killed, they're really going to choose sex?
This isn't to be confused with the theoretical and equally confusing concept of gaydar, which the Canadian authorities hoped would reveal people's sexual preferences. All the same, it's crazy to think that any amount of time was spent working on a gay bomb.
When the Pentagon says that they rejected this proposal, it's simply not true, and we have the facts to demonstrate that they've continued to think about it and to consider it.
Number 18, Operation Menu. The Vietnam War affected neighboring nations in Southeast Asia, such as Cambodia. Northern Vietnamese troops used the eastern part of Cambodia for resupplying an encampment during the conflict. This prompted a bombing campaign from the U.S., which targeted Cambodian sites operating along the Vietnamese border. From 1969 to 1970, this bombardment leveled much of the area. This action was hugely controversial, given the force and destruction unleashed on the Cambodians, along with the fact that the secret operation was conducted on a non-combatant country. It later inspired Operation Freedom Deal, which was an even harsher campaign that cut deeper into the heart of Cambodia. Details of this scheme were largely revealed in a declassification from the year 2000.
They can't impeach me for bombing Cambodia. The president can bomb anybody he likes. Sure.
Number 17. The U.S. worked with former Nazi scientists. Even though the Allies won the war and put many Nazi war criminals on trial, that didn't stop the U.S. from hiring German scientists. These experts were later integral in the development of the U.S. space program and other military improvements during the Cold War. Many of them had close ties and allegiance to the Nazis, making this entire operation all the more controversial.
There was, on the one hand, the truth about the program kept secret, and on the other hand, the idea that we'll tell the public that these are the good Germans.
The Soviet Union also conducted a similar operation in attempts to bolster their post-war staying power. One of the recruits
for the American side, Wernher von Braun is considered among the more important figures in modern rocketry and early space travel. Sometimes celebrating their achievements, the authorities also largely disregarded many of the subjects' connections to atrocities. Number 16. The Business Plot Coup.
Well, somebody's trying to do something dark and treacherous.
Known as the Business Plot, this little-known conspiracy wanted to bring down the presidency of Franklin D. Roosevelt. Although this was a nefarious coup, the case didn't come to light until the testimony of retired General Smedley Butler. Butler asserted that he was asked to usurp the 32nd President of the United States, partly due to his support of veterans groups.
The plan as outlined to me was to form an organization of veterans, to use as a bluff or as a club at least, to intimidate the government and break down our democratic institutions.
Even with the general's revelations, some people questioned the veracity of certain details and the extent of the planning that took place. George H.W. Bush's father, Prescott Bush, has been linked to the plot, but it's still unconfirmed as to his ultimate involvement. David O. Russell's film Amsterdam is just one project that fictionalizes the events surrounding the scheme.
They're paying you to be their mouthpiece.
That's right, exactly.
And they know the veterans will follow.
Number 15. Faked Gulf War testimony.
What I saw happen to the children of Kuwait and to my country has changed my life forever.
The Gulf War was a brief but notable conflict preempted by the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait. The U.S. intervened soon after, using a number of stories to support the decision, including the testimony of a teenager.
Withdraw from Kuwait or face a coalition ready and willing to employ all means necessary.
She was known as Nayira, and her account of babies being removed from incubators in Kuwait shocked and helped sell the war to American citizens.
I took the incubators and left the children to die on the cold floor. It was horrifying.
It became a much-quoted story for President George H.W. Bush and other proponents of military action. Later revealed to be falsified, Nayira was actually the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador to the United States. She not only didn't see any crimes firsthand, but many details were generated by a PR firm. The case has become infamous as a deeply flawed attempt to sell the war.
I'm glad I'm 15, old enough to remember Kuwait before Saddam Hussein destroyed it, and young enough to rebuild it.
Number 14. Tuskegee Study.
They were never told that they had the disease.
One of the most horrifying chapters in American medical history came out of the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. A research study offered black men free health care in exchange for a secretive and unethical observation, withholding syphilis diagnoses from participating members. Researchers from health organizations such as the U.S. Public Health Service attempted to study the effects of untreated syphilis without treating the patients.
Knowing that you were denied treatment and that you were lied to would affect anybody.
This also came at a time when penicillin was becoming a widely confirmed treatment for the sufferers of the disease.
And for the sake of science, they sacrificed some human beings. And it raised the question, did they really believe these men were human beings?
Not only was it a complete travesty perpetrated by the medical community, but it created a genuine distrust of the healthcare system among many people in the African American community.
What the United States government did was shameful, and I am sorry.
Number 13, Operation Condor. At this point, it's well known that the CIA had a large-scale and destructive influence on South American politics. Operation Condor was one such plan that completely altered the landscape of countries such as Argentina and Chile. By propping up dictators like Augusto Pinochet, the U.S. helped finance coups of various leaders across the continent. The actions that were supported by American intelligence groups created irreversible damage in these nations, and thousands were killed. President Clinton eventually declassified more information about the operation and its effects, bringing forth new details about the plans to delegitimize left-leaning political movements in the region. In the decades since Operation Condor, its lasting impact is still felt in the countries affected.
El tema de la figura del sobreviviente, ¿no es así? Que es una figura bastante complicada, porque todo el mundo, la pregunta es de rigor, ¿por qué no te mataron a vos?
Number 12, Bohemian Grove. Rumors have always swirled about secret societies and country clubs where elites meet up to discuss world affairs. In the case of Bohemian Grove, this accusation is at least partly true. Many of the most powerful and influential American figures of the 20th century met at the California Club. The place was reserved for people like Ronald Reagan and Richard Nixon, along with a list of businessmen and even Nobel laureates.
Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan had a talk there about who was going to run for president first.
And obviously Richard Nixon won that.
While one of their precepts involves leaving world affairs at the door, there's no shortage of evidence to the contrary. It was also the site of a meeting regarding the Manhattan Project.
The Manhattan Project was conceived at the Grove in 1942. The Manhattan Project, of course, is what led to the atom bomb.
The presence of many U.S. presidents provokes even more gossip about the other conversations that took place there. Number 11. The FBI spied on John Lennon.
They're after us because we talk about peace, you know. I mean,
when John Lennon moved to the U.S. in the 70s, he became a target of FBI observation. His outspoken political beliefs were already controversial, and some U.S. leaders worried that he would influence the next election. With stories swirling about Lennon's possible tour, which was an apparent attempt to recruit young liberal voters, J. Edgar Hoover put the musician under close watch. Not only that, the artist was threatened with deportation during this period. Republican Richard Nixon ended up winning the 1972 election, but the attempts to kick the singer out of the country continued until a court ruling in 1975.
when we approach people for help, somebody somewhere rings them up and says, these people are criminals.
Unsurprisingly, this wasn't the first or last person hounded by the FBI, as their COINTEL program spied on many citizens and political groups.
Secret FBI memos made public today show that the late J. Edgar Hoover ordered a nationwide campaign to disrupt the activities of the New Left without telling any of his superiors about it.
Number 10. Big Tobacco's Big Lie.
There's extensive use of this technology, which is called ammonia chemistry, that allows for nicotine to be more rapidly absorbed in the lungs and therefore affect the brain and central nervous system.
Smoking causes lung cancer and a lot of other adverse health effects. Scientists demonstrated this definitively in the 1950s. However, public opinion wavered for decades, with sources springing up to generate controversy and debate. Some suspected that the tobacco industry was suppressing and distorting the facts through a coordinated campaign, and it eventually came out that they were. Together, the world's largest tobacco companies initiated Operation Berkshire to generate fake controversy and debate. Big Tobacco knew that smoking caused cancer and that nicotine was addictive. They decided not to make cigarettes less harmful because addiction made them a lot of money.
Now, the work we did here is confidential, not for public scrutiny, any more than amongst family matters.
Threatening my family now, too.
Just goes to show, where there's smoke, there's often fire.
See how camels agree with your throat. See how mild and good tasting a cigarette can be.
Number 9. The FBI spied on political activist groups. Those involved in political protests and other activist causes are often paranoid that they're being watched. And they should be, because it's happened before and it can happen again.
Tapes from the hotel rooms, FBI reports, those are pieces of information that we shouldn't have.
From the late 50s to the early 70s, the FBI engaged in illegal surveillance, infiltration, and disruption of protest movements and other organizations deemed subversive.
He realized how sick this country was. We were trying to reveal the truth about segregation.
These ranged from independence movements to civil rights movements to feminist organizations. They even had John Lennon, the former Beatles frontman, under watch. While this program, named COINTELPRO, was abolished in 1971, others may have taken its place.
This represents the darkest part of the Bureau's history.
Number 8. The first female U.S. president. While the United States has yet to elect a woman to the office of president, by electoral college anyway, some theorize that a woman has assumed the duties of the office already. In 1919, President Woodrow Wilson suffered a debilitating stroke. This left him bedridden and partially paralyzed with some impaired judgment.
If I don't help him be president, what kind of wife am I?
For over a year, Wilson's wife Edith aided him in governing the country, to the point where she was basically performing his job in all but name. The degree of her involvement was kept a close secret, and Wilson herself denied that she made executive decisions until her death.
So he's like sitting there, and they like move his arm, and then they just release that to the press, and that's how dumb people were back then.
Number 7. The White Sox threw the World Series. The Chicago White Sox are on record for having one of the longest droughts between winning World Series at 87 years. However, they weren't always known for their bad luck. Back in the late 1910s, the Sox won in 1917, and they even had a wonder-like shoeless Joe Jackson team. Yet, rumors during the 1919 series held that the games were fixed. The White Sox lost the series, but the rumors persisted into the next year. Eventually, a grand jury found evidence that 8 players, including Jackson, though his role is disputed, were involved in a conspiracy to receive money in exchange for throwing the series.
I think the Black Sox players saw a high reward for what they were doing. They could make as much as their yearly salary in 1 week for fixing the World Series.
While a trial found them not guilty, they were nevertheless banned from the league.
Look at that, huh?
Number 6, Roswell cover-up. In the summer of 1947, an object crashed down to Earth in Roswell, New Mexico. Theories that it was an alien spacecraft have pervaded pop culture for over a half a century since.
Everybody thinks that Roswell was the first sighting of a UFO in the United States, and then boom.
The U.S. Air Force claimed that the object was merely a weather balloon, only added fuel to the fire. And the conspiracy theorists were right. It was no weather balloon, and there was a cover-up. But it wasn't an alien ship either, probably. The object was a high-altitude balloon launched as part of Project Wolf. These balloons were intended to detect sound waves from Soviet atomic bomb tests. During the Cold War, the U.S. military couldn't exactly be honest about that in the papers. Now, whether you think that's another cover story, well...
Another damn Russian swine job.
Number 5. Scientologists infiltrated the U.S. government. The Church of Scientology is infamously touchy about any criticism of their organization. Their influence over celebrities is well known, but theories about their influence over the government are also out there. And here's the thing. Scientologists really did infiltrate the government. In the 1970s, at least 5,000 members of the organization conducted espionage on government agencies and private organizations. And this wasn't a fringe element either. The founder's wife, Mary Sue Hubbard, pleaded guilty and went to prison. It was one of the largest scale infiltrations of the U.S. government in history. All of this was done with the aim of destroying evidence that painted Scientology in an unfavorable light. It arguably had quite the opposite effect.
Boy, those Scientologists, they can be pretty sensitive.
Number 4, the Watergate scandal. Perhaps the most well-known political conspiracy of all time, the Watergate scandal was unthinkable when it occurred.
Because people have got to know whether or not their president is corrupt.
The scandal began when Republican President Richard Nixon's administration illegally wiretapped and broke into the Democratic National Committee headquarters.
We don't know who ordered the burglary, and we don't really know what the burglars were up to.
Their aim was to acquire information about Nixon's opposition in the forthcoming election. The arrest of the perpetrators led to attempts by Nixon and his administration to cover up their involvement. However, mounting evidence and leaks soon exploded into a scandal that has become a byword for political disgrace, leading to Nixon's resignation.
One of the things that's so hard to recreate and understand now, looking back, is there was no sense that the president could lie to the American people.
Things have changed, Gary.
Things have changed.
Number 3, the government is spying on you. The common refrain from pranks and conspiracy nuts for decades has been that the government is watching our every move. And it's not
Yep,
completely
they
wrong.
are.
With the rise of smartphones and the internet, the government has unprecedented access to information on its citizens.
Following us.
In the wake of 9/11, the Bush administration initiated far-reaching mass surveillance programs, both foreign and domestic. The NSA's activities in the years since have included sucking up and storing online history, emails, metadata, text messages, you name it. Edward Snowden revealed a lot of this info with his leaks, including how other governments were also implicated.
Even if you send it to somebody within the United States, your wholly domestic communication between you and your wife can go from New York to London.
Okay, they're going south, heavy south, southeast,
Believe that in the time since,
heavy
governments
south,
have
so
just given up. Number 2, false justification of war.
might have to readjust where my camera is. I won't be able to keep running the videos in the background.
3 North Vietnamese torpedo boats approached the Gulf of Tonkin. After the torpedo boats boats opened fire, the Maddox sank all three. 2 days later, the report of a second attack, known as the Gulf of Tonkin incident, prompted President Lyndon B. Johnson to authorize further military action in Vietnam. For years, people questioned this justification.
At one point, the commander of the ship said, "We're not certain." Another point, they said, "Yes, we're absolutely positive." And then finally, late in the day, Admiral Sharp said, "Yes, we're certain."
Hello, friends. I am so excited to welcome Levels Advisor, Dr. Robert Lustig, to a whole new level. If you are in the Levels ecosystem, you know this brilliant human being for his books, Fat Chance, Hacking the American Mind, and Metabolical. Dr. Lustig is a pediatric endocrinologist and professor emeritus at UCSF, and I think it's fair to say he's the most influential global thought leader on metabolic health. We are going to be calling him Rob today in this episode because that is his preference. And today we are going to be talking about how to interpret your cholesterol panel and other basic lab tests to get so much more out of them so you can really grasp where you are on the metabolic health spectrum, because I know that's something that everyone listening cares a lot about. So welcome, Rob. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Casey. It's always a pleasure, as you.
Well, let's just start by giving a quick overview of the four main elements of a cholesterol panel. What's in it and what do each of these tests mean and represent?
The first is the total cholesterol. Throw it in the garbage. Just throw it in the garbage. It means absolutely nothing. Anyone who tells you my cholesterol level is high, tell them you don't know what you're talking about, because a total cholesterol is useless. You need to know what kind of cholesterol you're talking about. So that is the first piece. The second piece is called LDL. Now, LDL has a checkered history, to say the least. There is no doubt, absolutely no doubt, that LDL levels correlate with heart disease risk in large populations. That is true. I don't argue that. And yes, you do need to know your LDL. But the medical profession places way too much significance on this test. And they do it because we had a drug for it. Okay? The very first statin, lovastatin, came out in 1987. And so we put all our eggs in that one basket and said, LDL matters the most. Turns out the hazard risk ratio for high LDL and heart disease is 1.3. In other words, if you have a high LDL, you have a 30% more likely risk of developing a heart attack in your lifetime. Now, that's not nothing. That's real. That's reportable. That's public health, intervenable. I don't argue that. So you do need to know. But there's something that's much more concerning, which we'll talk about in a moment. Now, here's the problem with LDL in 10 words or less. There's not one, there's two. And when you measure your LDL, you measure both at the same time. But it turns out only one of the two matters for heart disease. The other one is actually completely cardiovascularly neutral. But the measurement picks up both at the same time. So the question to you is, how do you know which one's which? How do you know whether or not, if you have a high LDL, whether it's the kind that matters or the kind that doesn't? And that's what your doctor does not know. So he's going to say to you, well, you have an LDL level of 150, and that's high, and hey, you need a statin. Well, maybe you do, and maybe you don't. But you don't need that statin based on an LDL of 150, that's for sure. What you need to know is which of the two predominate in your lab test. How do you figure that out? That's where things get a little complicated. You need to know another piece of information that's in that lipid panel, and it's called your triglyceride level. Now, triglyceride also has a checkered history, and the reason it has a checkered history is because a lot of times when people say they're getting their fasting labs done, they're not fasting. Okay, they had their bagel and cream cheese that morning, and they're getting their blood drawn at 1 in the afternoon. Okay, and that's not fasting. And so fasting triglycerides can be all over the map. But
That's pretty good.
you are poisoning your mitochondria. Sugar and cyanide do the same thing. This is the toxin.
What are the key negatives when we consume the levels of sugar that many of us are currently consuming?
Well, first of all, let's make it very clear that sugar's not the only problem in our diet. It's the big one. It's the 2,000-pound gorilla in our diet. Sugar is a stuff too. Sugar is really once upon a time transformed sugar, you're actually inhibiting your body's energy production. Can you think of a chemical that inhibits your mitochondria and reduces ATP production? Cyanide. Cyanide does that. Okay? Sugar and cyanide do the same thing. Now, obviously, not as severely. Okay? Cyanide parts per million keel over and die on the spot. The sugar, it's in the parts per thousand, and you don't keel over on the spot, but you feel lousy, and over time, it's going to take its toll. But ultimately, if you're inhibiting your mitochondria, you are poisoning your body. And we now have the data to show how that occurs. So here's my question to you and your audience. Sugar is in virtually all ultra-processed foods. And ultra-processed foods are now 56% of the UK diet, and the amount of sugar that Brits eat, 62% of it is found in the ultra-processed food category. So my question to you and your audience is ultra-processed food food?
My view is that it's not really. I would say no, but I know to many people that is super controversial, which we're definitely going to talk about. But yeah, on a straight answer, I would say no. Depends on your definition, I guess, because it's energy, it's got some calories in it, which we consume in our mouth that enable us on one level to sort of, I guess you're saying it's actually reducing the energy production, the sugar within it anyway, but yeah, on one level it sustains people and they can actually get on with their days, at least in the short term anyway.
Well, you have to know what the definition of food is. So, if I had my Webster's dictionary right here, right now, you guys, in the UK probably don't use Webster's, you probably have something else, but if I pulled it off the shelf, it would say that the definition of food is the following, and I have no problem with this definition. Substrate that contributes to either the growth or burning of an ingredient. That's the definition. I have no problem with that definition. It's a fine definition. Alright? Substrate that contributes to either the growth practicing routinely.
Yeah.
But only if they changed the food. And if they didn't change the food, no amount of medicine I threw at them could make a difference.
Should probably take this down again. Let's see. Bitch. Come on.
Yeah, I mean, what strikes me as a really key message is that the majority of what we're buying to feed ourselves and our families is ultra-processed food, whether it's here in the UK or with you in America, and that is contributing to this tsunami of chronic ill health that we're seeing. It's pretty, it's pretty alarming, but what I think is so key, Rob, for me, is that it's so normalized now. Like, it's the norm everywhere, schools, hospitals. In fact, if you want to go down the real food route, you almost feel like a bit of a, like, if you try and do it with your kids, you actually become a social outcast in some ways. It's never right. I think this is the problem. It's the norm. We live so far away from what we used to. In fact, what you used to when you were 8 years old. I believe you had a something which I think beautifully illustrates this point.
So yeah, the bottom line is I completely agree with you. What we've done is we've normalized it. Once upon a time it was actually not normal to eat ultra-processed food, and today it is normal. And I remember when that happened because it happened to me. It happened to me in America. So on Saturday afternoon, my family was going to visit my grandfather, who lived about 8 miles away in Brooklyn. And my grandfather would walk me down to the corner grocery store to buy a comic book and a 6.5-ounce bottle of Coca-Cola. Pretty much every Saturday afternoon. And that was the big treat. The comic book and the Coca-Cola. That was on Ocean Avenue in Brooklyn. The fact is that was once a week and it was 6.5 ounces. Right? Today, children are consuming about, I think, 35 ounces a day, median. So they are getting about 6 times the amount of sugar that I did from that one Coke. And they're doing it every day instead of once a week.
Can we just pause on that for a second? You're saying you had 6 ounces once a week, and we're assuming back then that the rest of your diet throughout the week was low in sugar, low in processed food, sort of a real food diet?
Well, my mother worked 3 jobs, and so I ate a lot of Swanson TV dinners when they first came out. And I remember when they came out around 1964. The fried chicken, the Salisbury steak. I hated that Salisbury steak. And she trained me on how to turn the oven on and how to heat them up, because often she wasn't home at night. So, to some extent I was a latchkey kid because my mother worked so hard. My father was in Manhattan all day. And so, I basically had to sort of take care of myself. And sometimes I had to eat dinner, out of the freezer. And so I remember, those Swanson TV dinners, and, they were a problem, and they're still a problem. So you put the two together, and that was the beginning of, the, shall we say, onslaught of processed food in the United States about the mid-60s. Then things picked up even more in 1975 when we started substituting high fructose corn syrup for sucrose because it was half as expensive and it was homegrown. And then finally, the pièce de résistance came in 1977
when the McGovern Commission released its report saying that we all needed to eat less fat to try to prevent cardiovascular disease. Well, when you take the fat out of food, it tastes like cardboard. And so what did the food industry do? It basically replaced the fat with sugar. That's why we ended up with Entenmann's fat-free cakes and, and the like. And that was when the pasta craze, first hit was, refined carbohydrate because it was, quote, low in fat, etc. And, now we're off to the races. And it's just exploded ever since.
Is it the sugar that's inherently bad in and of itself, or is it the excess amounts? I mean, or is it both, right? Because I think a lot of people might say, well, look, you know what, this never used to be a problem, right? And we would have the odd sweet treat now and again. But so, and actually there's quite a few prominent scientists, as you're well aware, Rob, who say actually sugar's not a problem. Sugar's actually completely fine.
We're working on it. We're working on it. I have a bone to pick with some of those scientists, and we can argue that and talk about that if you like, as to exactly why they say what they say. So here's what I can tell you. All right. There are social drinkers, and there are alcoholics. Now, social drinkers can pick up a beer and put it down, and they don't need one every day. Alcoholics pick up a whiskey and can't put it down, and they need it 3 times a day. Right?
Yeah.
Did the one beer that the social drinker drank hurt them?
Unlikely.
Unlikely. Unlikely. And the reason it's unlikely is because there is what is known as a first pass effect. You drink the alcohol in the beer. First of all, it's very low percentage, right? It's only about 3.6% in a beer, all right? And that is about 60 calories worth or so of alcohol. And what happens is that the first pass effect, the stomach and intestine metabolize that alcohol before any of it ever gets to the liver. And so the amount that actually hits the liver that could do damage is exceedingly small. And as long as you're not following up with a second beer and a third beer and a fourth beer and a fifth beer, like can happen at the Newcastle pub, you don't usually have a big problem, right? But if you keep doing that, then that is a problem. So it's a dose-dependent phenomenon, and your intestine is there to try to protect your liver from getting the onslaught before it will do damage. Same with sugar. No difference. So your intestine can take a small amount of sugar that you consume and can actually turn it into fat in the intestine. Intestinal de novo lipogenesis, the process of converting sugar to fat into VLDL in the intestine so that it will not go straight to your liver, right? And about 10% of an initial sugar bolus will undergo intestinal DNL and therefore be diverted away from the liver and into the bloodstream as VLDL. Now, that VLDL is not great for you because it could ultimately cause heart disease, but it's protecting the liver. But if you consume past your intestine's capacity to do that, now the rest of it's going to end up in your liver. And the problem with sugar in the liver is exactly the same as the problem of alcohol in the liver, because it causes the exact same processes. It causes glycation, it causes oxidative stress, it causes mitochondrial dysfunction, and basically drives insulin resistance, this phenomenon that we now know is at the base of virtually all chronic metabolic diseases. Therefore, your pancreas has to make extra insulin to make the liver do its job, because now the liver's not working right because it's been poisoned. And so insulin levels rise all over the body, and now you've got the risk for Alzheimer's, you've got the risk for heart disease, you've got the risk for cancer, you've got the risk for virtually every other chronic metabolic disease on the plate. all because of what happened to your liver.
Yeah.
And fructose, that sweet molecule in sugar, basically has the same fate as alcohol. So, when people say, oh, well, you know, little sugar's fine, the answer is, yeah, because your intestine diverts that little bit away from the liver. As soon as you overwhelm that capacity, now your liver is right in the crosshairs. And that's when chronic disease is going to start.
Yeah. Rob, you're a pediatrician. I've seen videos of you talking with passion about this exact topic maybe 15 years ago, still online.
Something like that.
When was the first time for you that you started to think, you know, what's going on here? In the book, you have been pretty, it's pretty provocative at times. I actually agree with it, so I like it. You've really gone out there, you've ripped into modern medicine at times, and we're definitely going to talk about that.
Yep.
But when was it, because you do have this sort of incredible passion and energy to get this message out there,